that. And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with another episode of UFO News Network Sunday. We've got a big-time roundtable discussion ready for y'all, and we're going to be joined by Karen Brard, Earl Gray, Rich Hoffman, Shane Hurd, Alejandro Rojas, and Dr. Irena Scott, reviewing the first episode of Unidentified Inside America's UFO investigation. It's out finally after all this time. The TTSA group has finally gotten their TV show on the road, telling their story their way. And let's get right down to it. What did everyone think of the show? Just go ahead and jump right on in.
Terrific.
I thought it was well done. I liked it.
This is Earl. I thought it was wonderful. I thought it was soft disclosure, not the whole story, but hey, it's getting to, a mass audience that, used to ask me where my tinfoil hat was, and now people ask me better questions. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Shane. I enjoyed it very much as well, and I watched it through twice. And the first time I watched it, for me personally, as a person, I have some knowledge on the subject. And then the second time I tried to watch it from the perspective of someone that, was new or just interested, or, like maybe my wife would interpret it. And I was really satisfied from both perspectives because, it gave me some of the meat I needed to see and hear. And yet it was laid out in a cogent and simple and direct forward way that a newcomer, could certainly get with the program pretty quick on it.
This is Rich. I think after, we put together a 270-page paper on it, for me, it was a little bit like, okay, yeah, I know. But I was very happy to see the female pilot come forward. She didn't reveal her identity, but she actually engaged in telling her perspective, which we had not had a chance to do. So there were elements of the case that were discussed, which I was particularly pleased that they did it the way that they did it.
Yeah, they didn't beat around the bush, and that was a bit of a coup for them to actually get her on, even in the shadows, with her identity not properly revealed. But sure. We knew she was out there, and it had been talked about for a long time that some insiders, Paco Chirichi, I think Fravor as well, had said behind the scenes, she's never going to come forward. So this was a nice little coup for them, and she was very compelling.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that I really found it great that they used her to kind of walk the narrative through the Nimitz, because for those of us, like all of us here, we're all very familiar with the Nimitz case, some of us more than others, but all of us know quite a bit about it. We've read all the reports, we've heard from many of the witnesses, but even we got to see something new by sitting there and watching her for the first time share the story from her perspective, with Fravor coming in and other great graphics, and that was great. That was really cool to see.
Yeah, I thought the amount of emotion she displayed was pretty compelling as well. Fravor, obviously he's he's a confident guy, but with her, she, you got a sense that they were a little unnerved by the whole thing, and I think that made that storyline pretty compelling as well.
And this was something that I thought was pretty interesting. She had talked. She was when this event took place. She was very new. And another thing that had been discussed amongst the geeks like us who have been following every the smallest breadcrumb, the smallest detail. It had been said that the incident shook her up, and still, even after all this time, that sort of came across in the interview.
I think that contrast was great. You have Fravor, who is seasoned, and he's in this jet, and he's like excited. Man, here's something new and different. I want to go take a look at what the heck is going on down here. And then she's apprehensive. And you kind of read some of that in the reports where she was kind of like, whoa, they're asking if we have weapons, and that kind of creeped them out. But you got more of a sense of the emotion and, the fear when they're asking if they have weapons, like, oh my gosh, why are they asking us this before we're, zeroing in on this weird thing?
Ordnance, you don't carry ordnance during war games. You hope to have everybody come home from that.
It's strange that they would have even asked.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Karen, and I just wanted to add, I'd heard this story many times, but it wasn't until I watched the show that it really became alive for me, and it really got me excited because even though I'd heard it before, seeing the recreations on the television and hearing the words, it just hit me how amazing and how overwhelming this must have been, seeing this, 40-foot Tic-Tac doing all these weird things. And it just really brought it to life for me, which I really enjoyed.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm guessing that none of the pilots, it's not like they were UFO people, No, this you got to figure, I mean, they're expecting drug runners, and suddenly, it's Independence Day, as David Fravor was mentioning. Yeah.
And another thing I wanted to add is that I think it's important for us to maybe mention to our non-UFO acquaintances and family that, hey, maybe you'd like to watch this show, because it's not a weird, far out there show, because there's so many people that don't even watch a UFO show if it has the words, if they know it's about UFOs, because they think it's going to be just like all the other shows have been before. Whereas this show is different. This show has people who are currently in the military. This is happening now in recent times, that I think that more people that aren't into UFOs will want to watch. But unless they know that, they won't even tune in.
Yeah, good point. And I thought just the whole tone of the program and kind of the pace of it, the way they laid it out and went back and forth between the footages and the commentary and stuff was different than most other UFO shows. And it just had that serious, tone to it that was, really,
exactly,
I thought, just appropriate for the information and for the audience.
Right. It was like a regular news show.
Yeah. I want to know, and I think you all probably felt this way. I did. There was a lot of this expressed online. We were all fearful. Of course, we've seen the TV shows. Many of us have been involved with television shows, and that we've almost always very disappointed with the end result. And a lot of us had fear that, this wouldn't be treated well and seriously. But I was happily, I felt good about the end results. I'm glad that, all of my fears were kind of, subsided after watching it.
I agree.
I was just going to say, I read a Facebook post that somebody said, oh, this is a boring show. And that was probably somebody used to the fantastical UFO shows with crazy claims. And I was like, you know what? That's what we need. We need a serious, boring UFO show for the UFO people, so the regular people will actually appreciate it.
Juxtaposed with Ancient Aliens, how about that? It was like it was framed between Ancient Aliens, the Antarctica stuff, and then suddenly though there's this serious, wonderful thing that really.
Yeah, I'll take boring any day.
Yeah. Hynek over Hancock,
I was pleased at one thing, and that was that they started to introduce who the character Lou Elizondo is. I thought that was a nice touch of getting to know who he is, because, let's face it, a lot of people just don't understand who he is. There's a mistrust, a lot of us, and others, ties to intelligence and our experiences around certain cases where you have the CIA coming in and confiscating all the data and stuff like that. So they're going to hopefully do, and I think that they are going to be going through and explaining more and more about who he is and what they're trying to do, and that'll be good. I think that'll give us a little bit more confidence in what they're about.
Yeah. I mean, he's a really regular, really regular guy that's easy to talk to, but he has been through a lot of stuff in his life. So this guy is very impressive. He's got his background is, most stuff he can't even talk about, but the guy's been through a lot.
Now, they did a great job with all of the background. Sorry about that. They had a lot of information to tackle in this first episode. And I just, as someone who writes about this, I know it's always hard to be concise and thorough, but they did such a great job with all of the backgrounds, because the backgrounds of all of these individuals is extraordinary. It's really important. Yeah. Their credibility is immense compared to anything else related to anything on television or much on television. I thought they did a great job being able to present all of their backgrounds accurately and thoroughly and still present much of the Nimitz case.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I mean, I was super impressed with Chris Mellon. I mean, that guy, just the way he speaks and, he's articulate, yet he's down to earth and,
he looks like a Hollywood actor.
Yeah. And he has a cool voice on top of it.
He's maturing too. And the way he's coming across is a lot better than what he did, I think, initially. And you can see that happen as you see him more and more on TV. I thought he did a great job the other day on Good Morning America. I think it was one of the better.
Yeah.
I think that I saw.
He's an impressive character, and what amazes me is the guy could have done nothing with his life. He probably had so much money he could have done nothing, but yet he dedicated his life to actually, doing a lot, and he worked really hard.
Thank goodness.
It takes a while. It takes a while to develop these media skills. If you folks remember when Lou Elizondo was first doing a little bit of TV way back in the day, back in December of 17 and maybe a little bit after that, he looked like he'd rather be in a combat zone than in front of a camera.
Well, and that's
kind of the same thing.
Probably at that time, that's probably the way he felt.
Yeah, well, that is true. And he's completely told me, he says, I'm an introvert. I'm not an extrovert. And this is very new territory for me to have to come out and be on TV, and it's awkward. Yeah.
And I would like to hear what you guys think. I've warned him that, you may become fairly famous. I mean, look at Giorgio. Of course, he's got the goofy hair and stuff, but Giorgio is also a very nice guy, very approachable. I really like Giorgio, but Lou's like that also. And I think that, he comes across that way on the show. He could become, if this show does well, and it could be, viewpoint, because I'm happy about a credible UFO show. Maybe the public won't be as excited about that, but he could get, some pretty decent notoriety through all of this.
I don't know that he wants that, too.
He doesn't, and he doesn't, and he doesn't think that'll happen. But I'm like, dude, this could happen. You better be ready.
Yeah. With the tattoo sleeves he's got, the guy's kind of buff, and I mean, who was saying that he's kind of X-Files, and no, he's not X-Files. He's more like Bruce Springsteen suddenly comes out, But
he's a dude you want to sit and have a beer with, no doubt.
Absolutely, yeah. He's the guy you want for the bouncer too.
Yeah. Hey, I had kind of a question, maybe that maybe Rich or Dr. Scott or anyone who's had involvement with the military-industrial complex, so to say. Did you guys notice either anything, the words they used or the way they said things or the things they didn't say in a certain way? Did that catch your attention at all? Do you know what I'm trying to get at? Like I work in government, and there's just certain terms you don't use because they have all this connotation to it, and you say it in a different way. I mean, did you guys pick up on anything like that?
Well, he asked several times. He mentioned, "I won't say anything classified," and he kept bringing that in. Mm-hmm. Probably make him feel better.
Yeah, I think that's the way and even my interactions with them, at the conference and stuff like that. The guys, I mean, well, first off, he's extremely patriotic, and he's a good soldier, and he's, he's gone through working in an intelligence capacity. He had access to a lot of information, and, you sit there and you question, can I have a conversation about this with even my family, and can I bring up these topics, and, and what's, and you try to be mindful of, well, what do I say, and can I say this, and, you don't want to be hauled off. But I think that from what I see is he's trying to be very careful. He will, call it very quickly and say, I can't talk about something. And, if you're in very, you have to look at this project initially was looked at as being a SAP program, okay? And in the context of it being a special access program, you can't even talk about the fact that you work in that program. you can't have your name attached to it. So all this like controversy that's going on about, well, he didn't work for this project or whatever like that, that's all potentially like, you covered up, if you would. There's always like a false story or something like that, because you can't have that. He'll be connected at a different level versus the program. So anyway, that being said, yes, you'll run across him being very careful, being very, I think, very professional about it.
Yes.
And I applaud his wanting to be discreet, at the same time being cautious.
Right.
Rich, I had a question for you. We were talking a little bit, messaging, where you were saying that this must have been sanctioned by the Department of Defense, because if it hadn't been these pilots, everybody that had gone on record, they'd be imprisoned right now. I mean, you're familiar with security oaths. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I found that very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so what happens on a lot of these things, and I ran across this back when I gave a UFO presentation at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to the FTD people this is decades and decades ago. But I mean, back when I got started, I was talking with one individual, and the typical thing is that once you have an encounter or something like that, and you hear it from Fravor, we come back and we meet with the intelligence guy and we sign non-disclosures or something like that, saying we won't talk about what we saw, and they're debriefed. And so then, what happens is over a period of time, in case of, which you might run across like these Nimitz guys, they're no longer active duty. And suddenly you hear them coming forward with discussing their cases. Well, what I find extremely compelling now is that you've got active duty soldiers that probably have had to do the same thing, and they're now openly discussing their cases, and that type of thing. But they're also not, you don't see them saying, here are the coordinates for for our ship, and you don't see them talking about the date yet of when that incident happened in terms of the Roosevelt. Now I'm talking about, right? So off the East Coast. So there's still elements of it, like, and even in the videos that they scrubbed off the GPS coordinates and some of the metadata. So what I'm trying to tell you is it's extremely interesting that you see that happening where active duty soldiers are able to talk. And when I talked with Lou about it, basically he said, well, that's the stuff that they've been working to have happen behind the scenes with the department. So that would tell me that there's somebody that's like the PAO, the Public Affairs Office or something, which typically gets involved when you go up and you get in front of cameras and stuff like that, would have probably somehow granted a release.
Rich, that was a real interesting point that you brought up regarding GPS coordinates and so on. One of the most astonishing things I find about this Nimitz case is after they had their initial sighting of the UFO, they then went on to a predetermined rendezvous point that they called a cap point. And right. The UFO was actually there waiting for them when they got there. I think that is absolutely astonishing. And does anyone want to venture a guess as to how that might have happened? or discuss it?
I don't know, but maybe they can read the minds and they know where they're going before they're even going there.
David Fravor said that he did not have the coordinates memorized, though, that it was on a screen. So they were actually reading.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
They were reading the tech, from the planes themselves, or maybe from the Nimitz. That's where they got them.
I just had an idea. What if they're from the future, so they already know where they were about to go?
That could be too, I guess.
Us from the future, maybe.
Yeah, they did say that a similar thing, that they did have that in their databases, or it was essentially in the computer system. So not necessarily maybe in their minds, but that is very important. So somehow, I mean, it's apparent. The odds are that somehow whatever this was able to access that information.
And of course, I don't remember that they went into this during the show, but we know that Fravor has discussed his onboard radar was jammed, yet the radar from the Princeton was able to pick these UFOs up. In fact, that's how they were directed to the location in the first place.
Frank, let me clarify. Okay, so his radar system was not jammed.
It was not, okay.
But, okay, so he only saw it visually. Okay, him and the other his Wizzo and the other plane. So what he describes is the fact that what was jamming was the third crew that went out that actually had the flare on it. That when he came back, that they indicated that they sensed that flight crew had the jamming.
Okay.
And then when the other interesting point here that I want to make is that we were never clear about whether the radar tapes that were being discussed on the ship were that of the Princeton or what. And it turns out it was, according to Fravor, he had two tapes handed to him from that third crew. One was of the object that they got the flare on, and then the other tape was the radar. Now, he allegedly says that he looked at both. What he doesn't clarify is that the radar, would have been jammed, and that would have what that would have given on that tape. I have no idea, but he made it very clear it was the third crew that was out. That's where the jamming took place, because we very carefully looked at what. On his flight, was he jammed? And he said no. And,
okay. So Rich, that third flight, that was the pilot who goes by the name of Cheeks. Is it that fellow we're talking about here? Or
no,
it's not.
So let me clarify that you had Cheeks, Colonel Kurth was in the Marine group. He was on that Marine-based aircraft. Remember that they were playing a game? The game was that they were supposed to have a game, go to the cap point. The two planes were supposed to be at the cap point, and they were going to be the blue team, the friendlies. And the non-friendlies was going to be the Marine group, which is Kurth and Cheeks. And they were set up out in the ocean. In fact, what you find out is Kurth is the one who actually saw the bubbling of the water before Fravor did. Okay. So, because he was already out in that general area and actually saw it first, but he didn't see the Tic-Tac. So I want to make it very clear to you that the radar jamming was very interesting in our report, and you'd have to read it. But what Fravor will tell you is that there's the active and passive jamming, and this was active jamming, meaning that whatever it was. Typically could have led to them going into full combat had they had weapons.
Yeah, Fravor had made the statement that it's an act of war to jam. Active jam is an act of war. So again, this whole threat, connotation to this. I mean, again, you're in the military. You're engaged in this way. You can't blame them for interpreting in that way.
Correct. And they showed up at the cap point, and that's where they're supposed to meet their enemy.
That's crazy.
So what were we being told there? That's a little scary, isn't it?
Yeah, I wonder. Excuse me. I wonder if at first they thought they were being tested with some new, being not told about what was going to happen, and they were being tested at first.
Yeah.
Fravor did talk about that. They and others that they had assumed, and Fravor even said this in Oregon, that they had assumed what they were catching on radar up until this point. And we heard this actually in those clips from the guys at the Roosevelt too, that they had assumed that whatever they were seeing most likely was ours, some sort of top secret project being tested in the area. Both of the locations where these incidents happened, they were during training, during testing periods. Tyler Rogaway has made the point that they were testing even new radar technologies at the time. So that's what a lot of the pilots thought. But Fravor said that, and what's important about Fravor, I think, in his testimony is that when this occurred, he actively investigated at the time. He collected the information, such as the radar data available to him. He looked at the videos. He talked to his colleagues on the different ships. So he investigated to look into what the heck did I just experience? And it wasn't until time passed that he began to believe this was definitely not ours. He felt if it was ours, there's no way they could have kept that secret, and I wouldn't have discovered that over the years. So this has got to be something else, is how he felt. That's what he expressed in Oregon.
But by the way, the other thing is that these were brand new F-18 Model Fs that were just out and the first time from Boeing. So these are new aircraft that they're on too. So keep that in mind.
Wow.
They were checking them out.
I've got a question. This is Earl again. That they saw the white water down below, and that kind of, I have the feeling that didn't that kind of divert them from going to where they were originally getting the radar hits off of Catalina Island? I wonder if they were misled by it. No,
they were at the merge point, so they saw the bubbling water at what they call the merge point, is essentially in the location they were supposed to go to. But that brought the attention to the area
Tic-Tac.
where the Tic-Tac was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which was a completely different direction from Catalina Island, by the way. I mean, they were going out to the west of where the ship was actually located at the time. And so they were going out in a completely opposite direction from Catalina Island, where on the previous days there was a lot of this activity that was being reported by Kevin Day, where these things were popping down from high altitudes and doing what they were doing.
I want to ask Shane, put you on the spot a little, because there's certainly a lot of information that's not being shared. I wonder, what were you getting at? What were you noticing, Shane, that made you ask that question?
Yeah, I thought that Lou was very measured in what he said, in the way he said it, and he was very careful. It appeared to me anyway that he was very careful how he chose his words, and that's kind of obvious from the perspective that, hey, we want to make sure this show is credible and we don't want to speculate. But I thought there might be even something deeper, from and nothing conspiratorial. I'm just saying from, somebody who has knowledge working with the military, with intelligence. Again, I have that experience in government where there are just things you don't say in a certain way because of the political ramifications.
Right.
And I kind of got that feeling that, all of them really, but in particular Lou, because this show is,
well, he did
definitely
say,
profiling him.
Lou did say in Alabama at the SCU conference that he has to be very careful because there are people in on the inside who are not happy with the information he's sharing, and he has to be careful what he says because they're watching everything he says just in case he mentions something beyond what he should share. So
Right.
Good point.
He's
yeah,
careful.
and I want to jump in here because one thing that he was quoted as saying in the show, it was right there forever, and he was asked at your conference, Rich, as well. The question was basically about frequency, and in the show, Elizondo was quoted as saying that is a sensitive number. And I want to get some feedback on that. I thought that was kind of a key statement, not a very long-winded one, but I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, one of the other things that I want to bring up about Lou is that he pointed out. He said, you saw this early on when you didn't hear him talking about being connected at all to the OSAP program. He didn't talk about that, right?
No.
He said he was part of the ATIP program. Okay.
Right.
And then the other point here that I want to make is that you want to hear him making statements about what the current program is. He's still in contact with the lead for that. But I mean, he's not outing that person, and they've gone on and changed the name of it and everything else. But the point is that I'm trying to get at, he will not speak or speculate even about that kind of thing. He'll only talk about what he feels that he can talk about and what he was actively involved with.
Yes, and
Right.
something else, I don't know if everyone knows this. When he was involved with this, he never researched anything in the UFO field. He didn't go around and say, let me look up any background. He did nothing of that because he said he didn't want anything to affect his judgment of what was happening. So he doesn't know about any of the UFO stuff that he does now. But he didn't know any of the authors, any of the researchers. He knew nothing about UFO research previously.
I think the word he used was pollute. He didn't want to pollute his opinion by looking into what's been said in the past.
Right. Which is a very smart
Clean
move,
slate.
I think.
Yeah.
So he's
Well,
got
at that
a tough
time, but
job.
that has changed because he did discuss the history of UFOs. It was basically the lion's share of his presentation when they went to Italy.
But that was
And
after
they
he
messed
was
it up
had
a
left.
Right,
little bit.
understood.
Yeah.
But that
But I
has
think
changed
that
since
that's-
then.
So you've got multiple levels where he's got to be very careful. He's got to be careful not to talk about anything classified. He's got to be careful not to talk about anything he doesn't want to share that his friends on the inside wouldn't want him to share because he respects, his colleagues. And then he's also got to make sure that he's not overstating anything, which we're all prone to do at times, when we get excited and talk about stuff. So, yeah. So in the background, he's got this metering that has to happen. And that's why he doesn't like doing this public speaking stuff. But I think that I think he does a great job with it.
Yeah,
I
me
agree.
too.
I agree. I think he does very well with it, and he comes across very credible and very, very measured and careful. And he does that, and he's trying to be very precise. He doesn't get into the speculation. You don't hear him saying that they're aliens, right? He's very cautious about saying that. He said, well, and it's one of the hypotheses. And even Chris Mellon saying it, it's like it's one of the hypotheses, but we've also got to look at the fact that it could be potentially something else that we just don't know. And precisely, we just don't know. Do you know everything that the Russians have in their back door? You know everything the Chinese have? No, we don't. I mean, okay, so we rely on intel, and but still. You've got something that's outperforming and breaking, like what we typically see as laws of physics as we know them anyway. And how do you reconcile that? And then you go talking around with people that that are in high level positions and Boeing are Lockheed Martin, and they got the gentleman from Lockheed Martin who works at the Skunk Works. He said, well, we can't do anything like that. Okay.
Right. Yeah. I'm just really excited for the rest of the show because I'm thinking, we've known about the 3 short films that the Nimitz and the Tic-Tac and all those. We've known about those for quite a while. And much of that was in the very first show. So I'm thinking, what's going to be in those next 5 shows that's coming up? It's like,
I know.
I can tell you a little bit. I mean, I do know that in my conversation with Lou, I asked him, are you going to get into the, how many other cases are you going to be getting into with other Navy ships and stuff like, the USS Bainbridge or the USS Boxer? He said, we're not getting into those this season because
Wow.
we had to cut them off because we just have so much in 6 shows to do and 6 hours or whatever it was, And so he said that they ended up on the editing floor and hopefully if they get to do another season, then they can start to talk about those other events.
So that means there's a lot of stuff that's just going to be coming out every week that's going to be new.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
They're going to be focused. He said focus on the Roosevelt, and that's the one in 2015 off the East Coast near Florida. And that one's going to have a lot. That's the one with the gimbal and the go
Gimbal,
pass.
yeah.
And that seems to be coming up next week, and a little snippet from that was shown at the end of the show this past Friday. And what I thought was interesting, one little piece is apparently one of the pilots on camera is confirming that the audio to those two videos is in fact legitimate. There's been a lot of question about that, but he did seem to confirm that. So is anyone that's been something that has been questioned widely, that pilots don't talk that way, this can't possibly be legitimate.
Yeah, you bring up a great point here, because that I don't know if it's the next episode. I know Kevin Day's in that we're going to get more on Nimitz. So at some point, though, we're going to get a lot on Roosevelt. We've gotten maybe about 3 1-minute clips from the Roosevelt thing, which also one of those clips. And I've shared those clips myself on all of my pages. But one of those clips shows the origins of those two videos, where they discuss how the situation and how they were part of this Roosevelt incident. So although we've only got 3 minutes so far, so it's extremely exciting that I hope we get kind of like the Nimitz treatment we got on Roosevelt, where they go through the timeline of what happened when.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense to do it that way for sure.
Yeah, and I want to hear about the close incident where they almost collided. That's pretty wild.
That is scary.
Definitely
right.
A near miss means a near hit. It was a near hit.
And apparently, at least according to Jeremy Corbell, there is actual video of that. Do any of us think that is going to be shown?
I don't think there's going to be any more video than we've seen. I can't say that I know that for sure. Luckily, I'll have an interview sometime this week with Lou, and I'm going to ask that very question. But
cool.
I thought that there were indications that there might be some new video, but I may be wrong, and hopefully you can check that out, Al. I know that they're also probably going to at some point talk about the metal analysis, and so that might be a part of this season.
Right.
I
heard.
And Rendlesham.
Rendlesham is what I was just going to ask. I wonder if they have anything new on Rendlesham. I mean, that would be interesting.
Well, here's something new. But if we piece this all together, there have been some inferences from Nick Pope and Burroughs that the human research part of all of this, and then we've seen these articles from like Nolan, Kit Green, Dr. Kit Green, who's worked with the CIA and worked with TTSA or ATIP, at least both. I think we've heard from where they're examining people who have experiences, and they're checking things like their DNA and different aspects of the nature of the physical nature of these people to see if they could determine. I even interviewed Eric Davis, and he said he was part of this. They took samples from him because Eric Davis had a lot of experiences at Skinwalker, where they're trying to determine people who have experiences, is there something physical that makes that the case? And Nick Pope had inferred in an article that that was done to some Rendlesham witnesses. And so it's possible. Now, that kind of is a hush-hush part. We don't hear a lot about that from the group, but that may be where they go with Rendlesham. That would be something at least original they would have.
I heard a podcast with Eric Davis where he was featuring that whole discussion. I can't remember now what it was or which show it was, but I'm sure that if you do a Google look or something like that, you'll probably find Eric Davis. But it was an interesting show because it was an hour-long discussion about that very thing. And the fact that they were looking and what specifically that they were looking at, it was in I think it was in the middle, I can't remember which part of the brain now. But yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
The hypothalamus.
It's exciting.
What it changes, the hypothalamus.
Well, I think
that was a very interesting article by Dr. Davis. I thought that was very good. I've always been interested in neurology. It was my best course when I was in nursing school, and I just kind of ran with it, and have a lot of close friends actually who are neurologists, and if this causes a physical change in the human brain, that's really Is this a new sort of evolution? Is it a new kind of mutation that we're going through to give us, I don't know, cosmic consciousness or what? It's just very, very interesting.
Well, wasn't it Project Condign that had a report in it that included sort of a chart that indicated, different physical effects on different people according to the level of exposure they had to UFOs, and it's part of what led to John Burroughs, getting his medical records released so that he could deal with that health condition.
It wasn't necessarily what it was Condon was making the argument that there are EM effects from the UFO occurrences, although they were making the argument that it's some sort of plasma phenomena. And so they used the Rendlesham witnesses as an example that they had suffered some physical effects apparently from their experience. So it was very speculative, their statement around all of this. And it was related to, kind of this, what they felt was a natural phenomenon. But yeah, that is where John Burroughs said, look, here's evidence that people, at least in the UK, MOD felt that I was affected by my experience, and that did, I guess, help with his argument to get his VA privileges. But what's also interesting about that, one really weird part, is that his health records were classified for some reason. Yeah, and exactly. At least his lawyer had said that was very strange. It's not odd that people's records would get classified. However, this is for people that are working on classified projects. Burroughs was not. And so it was odd that they had classified that. And to this day, he does not have those records. He worked with McCain's office, and they were able to correct his military records, which were somehow changed and weren't accurate. But even McCain's office said, we'll probably never be able to get those medical records.
Amazing.
The other thing is that, the fact that the base had nuclear was also classified, and that's you don't announce the fact that you've got nuclear stuff over in another country, so
yeah, good point.
And I don't know that that's ever been completely acknowledged. In fact, I don't think Hall will even talk about that, or I don't even think Nick even goes there.
I'm not sure. But hey, it's been a great time talking with all you guys, but I got to get going. So
understood.
It's really nice talking to you guys.
I appreciate it, Karen. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Good talking with you.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Scott,
Yes.
are you out there?
Yes.
What do you think that the Tic-Tac incident was telling us? Do you think that we stumbled upon this, that it was just, by accident and they got caught? Or do you think, and if this was actually a show, was it a show of power, and why? I mean, I keep on, running that thought through my mind, what were they trying to tell us?
Well, in a lot of cases, it seems like it's more of a display than just a coincidence that somebody runs into them. And it reminds me of the work of Dr. Harley Rutledge, who did a real-time study of UFOs and was finding the same thing, that they could almost read your mind, that they could just change position, like according to what you thought. And he said a lot of it is subliminal, that it's something that people just don't understand consciously.
I mean, this was just such an overt a show of power, and that the Tic-Tac was waiting at the cap point. To me, I kind of get chills thinking about that.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's freaky.
Pretty aggressive, I mean, we've had aggressive shows of power before. Robert Solis's story of, the nukes kind of, ding, 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 turning off and then turning back on. Yes, we can do this, this disc hovering ominously over the missile base that he was stationed at. And we've, there are other stories that have come out that this has happened elsewhere, in the former Soviet Union, they had this happen. It's pretty overt.
Keep in mind, if you would, that if this phenomena has been around as long as it has been, they fully will know how to tap into our data. They know how to get information. They know how to jam our systems. They know how to turn off the missile systems. They know how to do all different kinds of things that we do, and they're keeping up with what we do. So I'm not the least bit surprised that they would have information to know where the cat point is, and probably know a lot more than what we want to give them credit for. Think about it. I mean, wouldn't we do the same thing if we were trying to collect intel on a species that we were like observing and wanting to interact with or whatever like that, or to know about? I mean, I'm not surprised from that standpoint.
That's so interesting, though. Yeah. What about this? Seems maybe really simplistic, but what I'm curious about is when these things move, they're clearly exceeding the sound barrier, and yet no sonic boom. I mean, is it even physically possible? Do we have the knowledge, or is there even theory how something that could move through the atmosphere that fast and not cause a sonic boom?
Well, I know there's theory.
Yeah, there's theory.
But it's very, even from what I understand, and people can correct me, even the theories are things that take tremendous amounts of energy. I think that was a really great point that at least Peter had made, one of the authors of the SCU report on Nimitz, is that, all of these things that we witnessed, in order for us and our understanding to accomplish these things, they would take an extreme amount of energy, a release of extreme amounts of energy, in some cases, equal to nuclear blasts. But we're not seeing that in this. So it really is demonstrating a physics that we don't understand.
Now, then take a look at the Navy schematics. I don't know if you saw that patent that was put out by that one gentleman up at NavAir. And if you look at those patents that they put in, they're dealing with right now advanced designs, and it's this theoretical where they're using microwave transmitters to be able to create what and by the way, HAL is heavily engaged in this as well. But you think about it like creating a vacuum around the ship. And that it's almost, I want to say like slipstreaming, but it's slipping through the atmosphere without it having the big bang on the backside like our aircraft. One of the things you see that Lou continues to point out is that this is transmedium, meaning that the same designed objects maneuver through water, in the air, and in space, where we build things that have a certain shape and a certain type of propulsion, and it's for each of those individual things, water, and that a submarine looks quite qualitatively different than an aircraft, and an aircraft looks qualitatively different than what we have in the way of things we put in space. So I think that what it's saying here is that we're seeing a physics that we don't currently have. But the encouraging thing is people are starting to think about that. And oh, by the way, even in that design, they built some sort of a power system in that design to be able to have it create energy at a large scale. And it's also able to avoid the inertia aspects, which I think is extremely interesting and compelling. So I think that if there's any validity to the patent, and by the way, Lou is very, very interested in that himself, then we might be getting to the point where we're starting to see how we could actually construct something that could do something very, very similar, but it's still a ways out, in terms of our developing it.
It's like the physics of Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner, It's a green turd. Mach X, and no fireball, no sonic boom. Do you guys think these things are piloted, or are they remote piloted? I mean, why do you build something that's 40 feet long if there's no crew? That's another thing I'm wondering about. Are we dealing with drones, or are we dealing with ships?
I tend to think the latter.
Right. And I think that, there's still an outstanding question of whose are they or what. But I think that a lot of what we're talking about, at least is evidence towards an intelligent nature to these things, which would rule out, any natural sort of phenomena. Even the theory that perhaps, sometimes the veil between other dimensions is thin and things can come true at times. That's kind of another theory out there, but that it demonstrates an intelligence where they are sort of demonstrating something to us. So that would mean potentially, we can't say it with 100% certainty. I think a large percent certainty that they're not human made. But then, that kind of factors into, I think, this conversation pretty largely as well.
One of the things that you heard very eloquently put with Fravor was that the object itself responded to his moves, and you heard the female pilot talking about that. It seemed as though it was responding to what he was doing. It specifically knew where to go, and so in that context, there's an intelligence behind it that knows how to. If it's a drone, they knew how to fly it. They knew where to go, and they had all that kind of ability to be able to fly the drone hypothetically to what they did, and they had visibility, and they could actually see what was going on, and so that's pretty impressive. And then if you have somebody that's in it, okay, well, can a small being that's 3 or 4 feet high, if we want to believe that that's the typical whatever, and they have the means to be able to see through the craft, or that they can control it with their minds or something like that. Well, that's possible too. It's when you get down. It's when you get down to those objects that are like being seen where they're like only the size of a baseball. You say, well, wait a minute, that's a pretty doggone small alien, right?
Yeah, the Tic-Tac's large enough where we all could, do this podcast inside of it. And be comfortable. This thing is pretty big.
Arrange that, Alejandro.
One day I'm trying. That's
Don't
my
spill
goal.
our secret.
But that's where it's just a big question mark with something this size. And knowing that, of course, the G-forces at the speed, nobody should be able to do that, but neither should any material be able to withstand those G-forces. But obviously it is. So they're able to do something, at least it seems this thing's exhibiting technology that is able to really counter all of everything we know about physics. So it could be possible there could be a physical being inside of one of those things.
One thing that I've heard many, many times in stories from experiencers that I've interviewed is that it's sort of Alice in Wonderland, like how something can be very small looking on the outside, a craft. And once they go inside the craft, it's suddenly just huge, voluminous. And so perhaps, if we're talking, folding, spaces and things like that, they may have just mastered physical properties of objects to where something could appear to be baseball sized on the outside, and you get sucked into it, and suddenly it's a cathedral inside.
A TARDIS.
A TARDIS.
Like the TARDIS.
Mundo.
That's funny.
Yeah. That going back to that patent a minute, it's interesting to me to see that they used microwave transmitters in that patent. And one of the things that I saw early on was microwave radiation at the landing case that I looked into, with a 70-foot in diameter area in Ohio was completely, the wheat was gone and stuff like that. There was puffed wheat. But we had microwave radiation. And if you think about Kansas and Delphos and stuff like that, microwave kind of thing is coming into play. And that's that polarizing vacuum that is being discussed around the craft. That also might lead into potentially the glowing that you might have around an object. a long time ago, Jim McCampbell wrote a book on ufology and put the physics and stuff like that was being discussed in that book, ufology. And, and one of the things he mentioned was that the objects seemingly would change colors or something like that. But there's a lot of this stuff. We just, need to do a better job of documenting, putting it together, eliminating all of the ash and trash, if you would, and going with some of the better cases, and actually seeing for example, right now I'd be looking to see, do the Tic-Tacs, did anybody report on the East Coast any of that same kind of there was like a mirage effect that was being described around the Tic-Tac. Did anybody see that kind of mirage-like effect? Because again, that's indicating some sort of a field around the object, right?
Yeah, like a force field type.
Yeah, some sort of a field, if you would, and maybe that's how it's helping to cushion this going through the atmosphere and not heating up.
Yes. There's no reentry.
The air.
There's no reentry of like an Apollo, space capsule coming into the atmosphere with these.
Exactly.
They're traveling from 180,000 feet down to sea level in an instant, and there's no fireball, there's no explosive effect.
And that's what's exciting about the show too, is that it's, of course, we can all discuss this, and we do, and we're grounded, level-headed researchers in this field, and we certainly do not feel that we're being fringe or talking just out of turn, when we're talking about this sort of stuff. But of course, we don't have the credentials of some of the guys in the show, so the skeptics can, kind of do whatever they want with all of this. But what's exciting about the show, and I think what really kind of had me feeling really excited watching the show, is just the level of credibility. And that's what's exciting when we're going to be talking about the gimbal video in particular, for instance, because there have been skeptics out there debunking some of these videos, yet they haven't even heard, the analysis from the Navy or from whoever else Lou had look at this in the ATIP program. But now we're going to be hearing from them. We heard from Fravor in Oregon about the gimbal, and he was supporting the physics, why this is not a plane, like some people have explained. And we're going to be getting more of that. And we got some of that in the first episode from the experts they brought in. That is really exciting to hear, because, then they're going to get into these real issues like we're talking about, as opposed to a lot of the skeptics out there assuming these are just normal aircraft being misinterpreted.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things I get a kick out of is, many, if you take a look at those five traits of UFOs that he talks about, I think for the most part, if you've been in ufology as long as many of us have, and you looked at cases, we've had this stuff throughout history doing these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it's new to us.
Nothing new.
It's like, well, UFOs have always not made a noise, or UFOs don't give a repulsion when they take off from a standstill, or there's no effects of that, or so it's like, what? Okay, nothing new here.
Yeah, but I'm looking at this show. I'm not really looking for something new. I'm looking for verifying what we all have been seeing, the old stuff, right?
Yeah,
there's been no proof. It's all speculative. But now we have credible people, very serious people doing some serious science, on a very serious subject. I mean, it's finally getting that kind of consideration, and I want that confirmation.
Yeah. Let me tell you. Okay, so going to your point, I think what I'm trying to tell you is that if you look back at the military cases that have been in the past, there have been some incredible encounters by military that are oftentimes, it's not as in front of your face, and nobody's, we're not out there talking about it. And yet you'll hear about those cases. I've been studying some of the Vietnam cases and stuff like that are going on, and you listen to the testimony even at the hearings that were that you often heard up on the Hill and stuff like that. And these guys are talking about, an object, for example, that was out at Big Sur that basically came in, shot 3 rays of light at a warhead that was going off, and you're going like, well, wait a minute, that's pretty doggone impressive.
Yeah.
And so, these things are getting now attention at the Navy level, but I'll tell you this much. I'm just as much impressed with some of the older cases that we've even had on record.
Yeah.
Even in Blue Book, even 1952 in Washington, you're exactly correct. When people see that, 2004 Nimitz, Roosevelt 2015, this isn't new. Ever since we've been looking at the UFO phenomena, Blue Book is chock full of cases that are very similar and just as extraordinary that nobody paid attention to, or at least not in the last few decades.
Absolutely. I have a quote from Dr. Bruce Maccabee. He made this. He wrote this on Facebook a couple of days ago, and I thought it was very impressive. And it's exactly what we're talking about here. I'll just read it. He said, "They want us to know that they are here and have superior capabilities and technology. To assure that we see them, they play with us. Because of this playing, most of the technical abilities that have been reported recently as if they were new discoveries, like extreme acceleration, have been known to the Air Force and the Navy for more than 70 years. And he's got a point there. We're talking, Project Blue Book, certainly,
Yeah.
He is right. The question is that, and this is what maybe we'll find out, maybe we won't, I don't know, is we know by researching that this whole black and white kind of, and it's what the PR departments of the entire Department of Defense has said, that, we haven't taken this seriously because we discovered there was no reason to take UFO seriously. Of course, we know through official documents that they certainly have taken many accounts seriously in the last few decades. So the military has not been black and white. There have been people inside who have taken this seriously, but who? And was it recorded? And did they work on it? Those are the questions we don't know for sure. People like Alejandro have told us, and we have seen this ourselves, that a lot of the times they just shove this under the rug because they don't want to deal with it. Has it all been like that? Or Paul Dean has done some work to discover these kind of departments out there that change their name and are very elusive and difficult to find, that are collecting this information and taking it seriously. How seriously have they taken it? How much research have they done? Those are some of the interesting questions I hope we get answers to.
Yeah. And how about this? Just a quick thought. Why the deafening silence from the Air Force, and it's coming through the Navy now? That weirds me out.
That's a great point, too. And, these departments, it was really interesting to see the Navy mention the Air Force in their UFO procedures, because these groups, as many of you know, and whether you're in the military or not, they don't get along that great. They don't share information. They're very adversarial, sometimes for fun, but sometimes they're pretty serious about it. So was the Navy prompting the Air Force by doing that? And if so, it seems like that was unsuccessful, because we've still, like you said, got this, what we feel is this deafening silence.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Air Force probably still has a bad taste in its mouth from Project Blue Book, but
and somebody's going to come up with an egg on their face with things like Roswell and the way it was coming up.
No kidding.
Swamp gas.
Yeah, exactly. It's probably a pride issue, and they don't want to look stupid, and somebody they have to walk back the Robertson report now. The whole Robertson panel where we'll deal with this with ridicule in the media, and now they have to walk it back, and that doesn't make them look very good. It doesn't make them look very.
And my hope is that eventually they can, obviously the Air Force and the Marine Corps and the Navy and even the Army. The Army's got military bases, and they ought to be. But if I told this to Lou, I said I would be really hopeful that at some point down the road that there is a government-wide look at not just those branches of service, but what about the FAA and feeding that data in and looking at that what pilots report, commercial pilots, and what are they seeing? Aren't those threats? Look at what Richard Haynes did with NARCAP. Was pointing out the fact that these are safety hazards, and then God bless him for all of his work that he did before he retired. But that's a threat as well. That's over our sovereign airspace, and So I'm hoping that eventually, if it's at the Senate level, that they can convince some of those things to happen for the other branches to come together as well.
Well, what you mentioned with the Robinson panel, and that's what's really significant, especially about the Navy involvement. And there's a couple aspects to that. We touched on this earlier, but really, essentially, what they discovered and what they determined in the Robinson panel is what they've done. And, we can't necessarily fault them for deciding, how are we going to deal with this? What's the best way for us to deal with this? And they thought, well, it'd probably be easier for us just to kind of poo-poo it and not pay attention. Or like Nick Pope says, he even participated when he worked in the MOD and spinning dirty tricks, just trying to put people to just don't pay attention to this because it could create too many headaches for them. The Navy is explicitly now changing to go against that policy. They are now being cooperative, and they're the only real group, because Lou did this on his own, by all appearances. They're the only ones to say, okay, we're going to step in front of this, and we're going to be proactive about being positive about this. Mm-hmm. And that is very significant. It seems like they prompted the Air Force to do the same. They didn't. The DOD has obviously, at least the Public Affairs Department, has been adversarial towards Lou. Coming forward, they have essentially given wrong information. We're used to this, often in UFO cases, they give wrong information, then they have to correct themselves. And they've had to do that over and over in this case when they've said, countered something that Lou had said. And then it turns out Lou was right all along, and they have to correct themselves. So they have not come on board with this whole Navy, new arena of being more proactive about UFOs. So the Navy's standing out on their own. And somebody mentioned, at least I think one of these pilots is active. You have to get permission if you're an active pilot to talk. So they got permission from the Navy to participate in this television show. So the Navy is proactively working with To the Stars. Some people see a conspiracy there. I don't. Here's what I see, and I would love to hear what you all feel. I see Chris Mellon, who is a very, very high-level official, let alone his family dynasty. He's a very important person, along the lines of, Rockefeller. Then you have Elizondo, you have Steve Justice, who, of course, worked for Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, which is also influential. I think you have a group of credible guys who are getting in there, and then the people who are also into this topic or believe that there should be more shared are finally like, look, we've got some advocates from the outside now. This is our chance to really start to get some movement here. And I think it's really kind of inspired, almost like a grassroots more of an effort than a top-down type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you can kind of see why Tom DeLonge's involved then, he provided an outlet monetarily, mainly monetarily, but he is a person. Like I saw George Knapp make a comment that Tom DeLonge just, he used shoe leather, knocked on doors, made phone calls, sent emails, to make this happen. And so maybe he was a conduit that this thought among many in the government that this stuff should be out there, just like John Podesta. And Tom came along at the right time. He had the money and he had good knowledge, and this was a way to start making this happen in a way that protects the government and is going to be credible.
Let me interject here, and Shane's right on. So it's a situation where, like as you just pointed out, Chris Mellon, who's like convinced. You have Lou, who's convinced. You have John, Reed, and three senators, and even John Glenn, and you had you always hear these like stories about like, well, the says this, or the government says that, and yet it's composed of people who don't share the same view, and so you have to realize that it's a big behemoth, and oftentimes, I mean, I can talk a lot of the people where I work, and they're convinced that there's something to it, and all this other stuff. But and so I get a kick out of these things. Well, the government says this. It doesn't believe this. It doesn't do. And I'm going like, that's not true.
Yeah.
It doesn't reflect everybody's views in the service. And many of them are quite interested in this subject. But guess what? It's risky for them to even talk about it because of the humiliation factor, or it might have negative repercussions for them, from their career standpoint or something. So they don't talk about it.
Yeah. The taboo extends to everybody.
Yeah,
within and without.
It's that stigma that's out there that is associated with it, and it's so prevalent that you can't even hardly bring it up. But I'm glad to see that it is being brought up, and that's now leading to a lot of hallway conversations that I normally didn't have, and it's leading to a lot of people that are now saying, well, yeah, I don't, and again, it goes back to the fact you have that credibility from now the government saying that they're doing something about it, where before they didn't. And I felt personally when Blue Book closed that my legs were cut out from underneath, because I thought, well, now it's suddenly like it's all a big joke. It's nothing, and so now it's something, because guess what? The government was investigating it, and there is something to it, and there's pilots that are coming out, and now you're going up and saying, see what I told you?
Yeah. I mean, that's all ufologists have wanted all along, is just take it serious. Don't, let's have a conversation. I'm not saying it has to be, X or Y, but study it, discuss it, because it's real. There's something going on, and there's nothing more frustrating to see something on that scale ignored, and what's it going to hurt, to engage and study it. I mean, it just is, hard to conceive, but it's our history, right? 70 years of it. So
I feel like a lot of people are gathering around what the To the Stars guys are doing that I've never really seen before. People, as you guys know, ufology can be quite a snake pit, and everybody is out for their own little group, this little group and that little group. But it seems like everybody's kind of gathering around the campfire here, and there's sort of a coalescence of attitude amongst people that perhaps this is our bright and shining moment where we can actually get this out and into the general, public. And what a good idea to use TV to do this, because people don't really read anymore like they did, unfortunately, because I'm a heavy reader. People don't trust the news services because of the partisanship involved with the news services. Everybody thinks everybody else is fake news now. How do you get this out to the public? And I've heard a lot of negative naysayers out there, just individuals whose complaint is oh, well, it's a TV show, it's a moneymaker. It's like, no, we're talking Harry Reid, John Podesta, all these big guys that really don't need a cash cow right now. They're pretty much set, and but television is a great medium to get this through. It's nonpartisan. It's not politicized in any way, shape, or form, like it would be if the president came out and announced that we weren't alone. To myself, I can't see any better way for them to have done this than with America's favorite pastime, which is watching television. It used to be baseball, I guess.
And one thing that Earl, one thing that I like about the show is it's given enough, but there's still plenty left over for us to chew over.
Heck yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it feels like a setup. This episode is a setup for others to come. It gave us enough, but your appetite is wet for more.
Yeah,
there's enough UFOs for everybody out there. We don't have to fight with each other. There's no lack of good UFO sightings, that's for sure.
Yeah, I definitely feel that the show exceeded expectations, and again, there were no great revelations per se, but still the presentation did provide some surprises. I thought it covered a lot of really interesting points, hammered home that cap point issue, which I think is key. Had the lady pilot. They had a lot of good stuff in there that even the geekiest among us should have been pretty pleased with.
Yes.
Totally agree.
So we're giving this show like a plus.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
like.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I
there
mean-
might have been some stylistic things that, well, you know, they didn't really need to play the music in the background during some of the interviews that they did. Maybe that was a little bit overwrought, but yeah, I mean, by and large, those are small points, really.
Yeah, they weren't going for sensationalistic. I mean, that's clear, right? It was not a, you know, no offense, but it wasn't Ancient Aliens. You know, these guys were being, you know, straightforward and factual and you know, laying out a court case in a way.
Yeah, the one thing that we'll have to be careful with is the marketing, and they didn't do a lot of marketing for the show. I don't know if they were predicting that this media storm would happen around the show. I kind of feel personally, with my experience, that I don't know that they would have bet on that. I don't know that they were, but fortunately for them, the media storm did happen and it did work for them well. But, you know, the marketing department is completely separate from the production group. So, for instance, we saw this when they put out that one marketing image, and they played with the image in the FLIR video to look more like your traditional UFO.
Right.
That, of course, makes us uncomfortable as researchers. We're going to see more of that, the more marketing, because the marketing department is the same marketing department that's marketing Ancient Aliens and Project Blue Book. We even saw this happen with an already sensationalized show, Project Blue Book, where they made it even more wild with like kind of implying that Hynek was going to run into an alien. So we're going to see when marketing department gets their hands on it, that's the TTSA is going to have less ability to meter what they do.
You're sure about that, Alejandro? Because
positive.
I do know. Okay.
I'm absolutely 100% positive. And here's why. We got to remember these are all disparate organizations. When you have a television show, you have different production companies that are involved. In this case, we have the producers like Anthony LaPay, who some of us have got to interview. Seems like a great guy, an investigative journalist. He wants to stick to the facts. You also have Tom DeLonge, who's an executive producer. But then you have the History Channel. History Channel is not going to be as careful because they don't understand the nuances, and plus their ideas, they want eyeballs. They don't necessarily care so much about the facts as we do. And then the marketing department is completely separate. This is a group of people that are in a different part of the country who have very little conversation with the people who are producing the show. And I hope they do this, and I guess we should encourage it, but it's really difficult for even Tom DeLonge to get in there and say, hey, guys, I mean, he's going to probably have to give him an ultimatum and say, if you guys don't market us this right, we're going to have to walk. I mean, you got to be really strong with these guys. Get it on paper, because they have to understand, because it's going to take an effort on their part to not do their normal processes. They're going to need someone to oversee them.
Yeah, that was the reason why I kind of pressed you on the point. It's a little, sort of comparing apples to oranges, but Stanley Kubrick, the director, famously had control over the marketing of his films. Maybe a little irony there, but sometimes creative
and
talent
he had to
does
battle
get that.
For that.
He did.
Yeah,
he did.
You're right. Sometimes it happens.
He did get it though.
Yeah, he did get it. You've got to go. And first of all, you got to have some leverage. So it can't be your first couple of movies. You got to do some hit movies, and then you have that sort of leverage, because sometimes filmmakers do that. But it's really difficult to do, even for the big guys.
Hey, I wanted to do a shout out to Dave Beatty for, basically after 1 week, he's had over 1 million views of his Nimitz encounters.
Yes.
And
yes.
I'll be honest, I pretty much liked what Dave did over what we saw in the show.
Me too.
Dave did a hell of a job putting together that and being accurate to the nth degree about everything that he did. I just want to give a shout out to him.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to bring something up too, Rich, if you don't mind. What I'd like to mention is when I watched the first version, I watched it on my big screen TV, and maybe within a week after, I happened to see the film Dunkirk by Christopher Nolan, which also included some CGI aerial scenes. And I got to tell you, it matched up I mean, it wasn't better. It wasn't. It was very comparable to what Nolan had done with his, $100 million Hollywood production. I was very impressed. I know a little bit about the tools that Dave works with. He did those aerial scenes with something called Cinema 4D, which is a really fine CGI program. And yeah, he did a fantastic job. And another thing I want to mention is the fact that two things are very, very difficult to get right in CGI. One of them is water, and the other is essentially the contrails from the jets, which are basically particle effects in 3D CGI. And he did a nice job on both of those. So, just from a technical end and knowing a little bit about the 3D animation that he included in there, it was, and to be honest with you, it did outstrip the work that they did with the Unidentified program. I don't know if you folks noticed, but what they did was they sort of desaturated the colors when they cut to the CGI that they used, the 3D CGI that they used. And usually the reason for that is the illusion doesn't hold up if you've got more color information in the scene. So they likely did that because it just didn't look that good. That's why they had to go ahead and do that. That's my guess. I don't know that. But that would be my guess as to why they did that. And that really speaks volumes to Dave's work as far as the 3D animation that he did.
Hear, hear.
I heard a lot
awesome.
of people saying that they liked Beatty's 3D animations better than the television show.
It was better.
Yes.
It was better. Let's not kid ourselves. Like I said, I watched both his document, the first version, on the same TV that I watched Dunkirk on, and I'm telling you, it matches up very, very nicely. It does. It's comparable.
I think that the fact that he's got over 1 million hits on that thing is remarkable in 1 week. I mean, so that going back to the fact that I think that this is gaining so much traction and interest that I'm hoping that it does. I hope that we can continue to see that it's now getting into the mainstream public, if you would, as opposed to just the UFO crowd or something like that. That mainstream public is now, watching this and taking it in. And I encourage people. I said, if you were on the basically the sitting post, if you would, or on the fence before, please watch this. And now that might help shape your future conversations. But I hope that does that.
Already has.
Yeah, it's just amazing what a dedicated guy, largely as far as the cutting and the assembling the footage, as far as I know, he did that pretty well by himself. And, hats off to him. It is tough work doing CGI animation, the 3D animation. It is not easy. And I know a little bit about what went on. It looked like he had also added that he didn't have in the first version a 3D version of the Hawkeye radar plane as well. So it looks like he went out and spent a few extra bucks and bought one of those models. That airplane modeling in the kind of details, that is some serious work. So he did go out and purchase those. I do know that. But, the path animation, it's not as difficult as character animation, but it's not easy, let me tell you.
Yep.
It's a labor for love for David, isn't it? I mean, that's what it is. It shows. He's a good guy, too.
Yes, he is.
Nice.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess, what are you all seeing as far as the reactions to the show? What I felt was interesting, I saw a lot of comments coming in from otherwise skeptical people, or even a lot of people who, the good thing, because of course not everybody was comfortable that this was right on the heels of Ancient Aliens, but I think a lot of those Ancient Alien people wouldn't have stuck around or might not have tuned in if it wasn't like that. And I know from experience from doing the Alien Con, the Ancient Aliens conference, of course, because I'm got a much more skeptical perspective than a lot of these people, and I'm providing facts about UFO history. But a lot of these guys are educated people who appreciate that. They just are curious about what might have happened in ancient times. So they're not all super fringy people. So it seems like a lot of people, it did open eyes to people who otherwise might not have tuned into the show.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I enjoy Ancient Aliens. It's obviously not the final word on the subjects that they cover. They've got their slant, their spin, But I've always enjoyed the show. I enjoy their enthusiasm about their end of the subject. I think that goes a long way. It's not all dark and forbidding. they're very excited about it. I mean, Giorgio obviously stands out in that department. David Childress as well. I enjoy that. I like the enthusiasm for the topic that they have. They haven't entirely seemed to have copied that over with the Unidentified show, but so long as they've got their facts, so long as they've got the material, and it seems like they do, and they're going to be able to fill 2 hours. And I'll tell you, they filled an hour very, very nice, an hour less commercial time, very, very nicely. They had no problems there, and I expect we'll see more as the shows roll on.
Yep, ditto.
And hey, I watch Ancient Aliens.
Yeah. That show's okay. That's okay.
It's my palm, but
it's entertaining.
But
just kidding.
It is entertaining,
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just like, my wife has to listen to me go, oh no.
But yeah, I've always liked their enthusiasm. That is what has set that show apart from so many other UFO shows that have run over the years. They are into their topic. Again, maybe you take some of the material with a grain of salt, but they are into it. It comes across. And I think that is really the secret ingredient for why that show has run so many seasons.
Yeah. What is it? 8th, 9th season now?
I think it's more than that. I think it's
Yeah, I don't know. A ton of seasons. It's pretty shocking. So, and I mean, the number of people that watch the show is absolutely mind-boggling. At the Alien Con, the first one, the reboot they did in California last year, what they did, so they did this Alien Con. It got way more people than they can handle. And so they actually fired the company that put it together because they weren't able to handle it. Got this new company, which geared up and was ready for a bigger crowd. They even got overwhelmed. And every one of these, they get overwhelmed by the number of people. We go there. These lines go down the blocks for ever. And then what happens, it's kind of sad because then they'll close the doors to the lectures or, they're done with the picture taking moment. And you hear everybody boo, but they just can't handle the number of people. It's like these Comic-Cons, these things. They're going to have to go to bigger and bigger venues. There are so many people into this. It's really shocking.
LA Convention Center this year, Alejandro. Right. It's over at LA Convention Center. Huge. It's where they do the big car show. I mean, I've been there a few times. And by the way, if anybody's coming out, do go to the MUFON panels, both of them, because I'm going to be on them.
I'll be there and I'll see you, buddy.
So we're coming up on an hour and a half. I'd like to wrap this up, and we had some streaming issues, so I'm going to have to upload this video later. So if we can go around the horn, Michael J. Hall, you've been quiet. You've been with us for a while. Let's get your thoughts, and then get kind of a final summation from everybody.
Thanks, Frank. I tell you what, I am just enjoying all the conversations here. This is exactly what needs to happen. Get this thing out to as many people as possible, as Alejandro says. The one question that I would throw into the mix that we haven't discussed on this yet, and we're going to take a whole nother show, I'm sure, to do that, would be why now? This incident happened in 2004, the Nimitz Tic-Tac issue, and we are now just hearing about it, with the major push in the mainstream media. That's the question that the attorney interrogatories need to have answered.
Well, I'll jump on that one really quick, and this is just a theory. Obviously, I don't have any inside information, don't really know, but there has to be some kind of thinking on the inside. And I think Steve Bassett and I discussed this last time he was on.
Yes.
There is still some kind of an inside team here that, if for whatever reason it comes to pass that it becomes undeniable that there is some sort of ET visitation going on, and they've done basically nothing with this. They've just given it short shrift and blown it off and denied it and so on and so forth. There would be some kind of a hell to pay with the public, that it's better off to sort of try to get something out there that, hey, we're on this and we've been on this. That's my best working theory. One. Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Just because, I think there are a lot of incredible people who really need to be given credit for a lot of this. In my view, at least from following the history and looking at it historically, what we can say, There may be stuff going on in the background, but everybody I've asked that to has said no, they don't have any evidence of that. But what we have are people like Hurd, who since the 70s tackled remote viewing, got that taken seriously by the government and ran a program, has continued to work on UFOs. He couples up with Bob Bigelow. Bob Bigelow spends millions and millions of dollars investigating this and gathering these scientists. These guys continue on to do all of this research and bring it credibility and try to make discoveries. Then they start to partner up with more people. We find out they're partnering up with the Pentagon, with Harry Reid. Then, then they're partnering up with Tom DeLonge. So it's this rich history that's gone on for a long time where these people for decades have been trying to bring credibility to this topic and do investigations and research. Some of us have been involved with all of that in the past. Some of us with MUFON worked on the Bigelow Project or things like that. Rich has been involved with and a lot of the SUU guys were involved with some of that work. So really, we have a lot of great people, including Leslie Kean, who's kind of worked on the forefront in bringing the information to the public, as well as George Knapp, that have been working at this for years. And this is the fruits of their work for decades. And a large part of all of this is that. On the surface, we know that. And I think we really owe a lot of gratitude, those of us who appreciate this, to those people.
Yes.
You're here.
Leslie Kean, that wonderful book that she wrote, The Pilots, and that, boy, oh boy, when that came out, that's when I really started to think about, I don't just want to be armchair about this, I want to get my feet dirty here, what a groundbreaking book.
That got me in.
And anyone else want to jump in with some final words?
Oh, I've just talked a lot, I think I pretty much said,
Irena.
we spent an hour and a half analyzing a 1 hour show, so I think we covered a lot. We covered a lot of ground.
I just want to say kudos to them for to the Stars Academy for putting together a great series here. The first show was excellent. I think that more to come. I'm looking forward to it. I think that it's going to help open up a lot more doors, and I think that's a good thing. I think that it's going to also help to get the general public more engaged and willing to engage it again, and I think that's a good thing. And I just all the way around, to me this is like a milestone event in my life. I'm just thrilled about it, and that's just me speaking out to say I'm glad to see all this attention. That there was all this news media coverage for days this week. Man, I'm just jumping up and down. This is what I've been waiting for a long time.
Well, 60 minutes is a lot better than the 5 minutes the news generally gives these kind of stories. And an hour and a half is better than 60 minutes. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I never thought I would see the day. And even this even feels like it snuck up on us quick, but I am so thrilled for it. And for all the people that have spent a long time, Dr. Scott, Rich, Alejandro, all you guys, like you said, many years, decades even, Stan Friedman, Bruce Maccabee, you name it. I mean, these guys really paved the way, and it's finally, we're seeing the fruit of it. And, I came along, more recently, but, I'm just like, wow, I'm glad to be alive right now and seeing this in my lifetime, because I really didn't or wasn't sure that we would see this. So it's great to not be ridiculed too.
We stand on the shoulders of giants, and some of those giants are on this very panel. Yeah, I'll say that. Yep. I'm with you, Shane.
We're still working the problem. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want to say that it's for me, it's a privilege to work with people like Earl and Shane and this whole group too, and to have people like Steve Bassett come on and because these guys are doing the right thing, trying to get to the answers, and I'm encouraged by the fact that, number one, that they're younger than me in many ways, and that they have an interest in this thing. But I applaud them for getting involved in this whole UFO thing. It's not, it's murky, it's muddy, but the good thing is that they've gotten engaged, and I'm just glad to be on with them. I applaud them for taking a stand and being willing to share.
Yeah, and we can learn from Stanton. We've talked about this in the last few weeks since his passing. He loved to debate. He loved people with different views.
Yes.
And he loved to discuss the different views, and he was very respectful of even Phil Klass. I mean, they had a sort of a relationship, and even though they debated, he was very respectful. And I think we all need to learn from that. And it's important right now that we all be as cohesive as possible and tolerate each other.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap everything up. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Karen Brard, Rich Hoffman, Shane Hurd, Michael J. Scott, and let's see. I got to wait here. Hang on a sec. Or Michael J. Hall. Sorry about that. I got you confused with your buddy Dave Scott. Rich Hoffman, Shane Hurd, Alejandro Rojas, and of course Dr. Irena Scott. Thanks everybody. We did have a streaming issue, so I will get this uploaded and get you the links as soon as they are available. Thanks for joining us, and good night, everybody.